Right now at the Crossings, we're in a series of lessons that we've been going through called The Road to Recovery. And the reason that we're doing this series of lessons is that we have relaunched our Celebrate Recovery ministry at the Crossings. And Celebrate Recovery is a ministry that's designed to help people overcome their habits and hang-ups and their addictions. Basically to say, all right, here's the issues that we have. These are the things we're addicted to, and here's how we're going to overcome those things. And at the Crossings, to have that ministry is an extremely, extremely exciting thing for us because so many of our members in the past have dealt with these addictions, and they're still fighting them today, and they're trying to overcome these things in their lives that have held on to them and held them down and destroyed their lives for so long. But they've seen God step into the picture, and they've been taught how to start overcoming those things. And because they're overcoming those addictions and those hurts and those habits and the hang-ups of their past, their lives are becoming something so different than they ever thought they could have been before. And they're excited about it. So we've relaunched Celebrate Recovery because we want to offer as much help to people as possible. But the one thing that we realize at the Crossings is that whether or not you're addicted to a substance or not, whether or not you are someone who would go to some kind of 12-step recovery program or not, we all have character defects and things that we're addicted to and things that we do and decisions that we make that affect our lives in a negative way, every single one of us. And you may not identify that and say, well, I need to go to Celebrate Recovery too, but it is those decisions and those addictions and those habits and all those things are things that negatively affect our lives. And we all need to be honest enough to look and say, this sermon series is not for a certain group of people. This is for all of us. Because we all struggle with things that can hurt our lives and can really weigh us down. And this week, we're in our fifth week on this series. And it's the fifth step of Celebrate Recovery. And what step 5 basically says is that I need to voluntarily submit to every change God wants me to make and ask Him to remove my character defects. And as you look at that, we need to, in order to do that, obviously, as we talked about before, we have to be willing to admit we have problems. We have character defects. We have addictions. We have things that we've got to deal with. And this next step is basically saying, okay, we've got to go from just this acknowledgement that this is there to saying, I'm going to submit to everything God says I need to change. And I need to humbly ask Him to step into this picture and help me overcome these character defects that I have, because if I don't, they're going to destroy my life. In Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, Paul writes to the church, and he says, offer yourselves as living sacrifices to God, dedicated to His service and pleasing to Him, and let God transform you inwardly by a complete change of your mind. And really, that's exactly what step 5 says. It says, listen, you've got to be willing to submit everything that God wants you to change to Him. And when you look at what Paul says, he says, offer yourself as a living sacrifice. What he's saying there is he's saying, listen, for so long, you've been living life the way that you want to live life. You've been making the decisions that you want to make, doing everything that you want to do. And from now on, what you're going to do is you're going to lay your life to the side. You're going to die to yourself, and you're going to listen to what God has to say. And He is going to transform your life inwardly, and He's going to help you learn to think a new way. And if we are going to overcome all these things that plague our lives, then we have got to be men and women. We've got to be people who look and say, I'm going to offer myself to God, and I'm going to do whatever He says because I want things to be different. The title on the lesson says, nothing changes if nothing changes. If you want something to be vastly different in your life, then you have to do something vastly different. And to start off with, we need to understand that means we are no longer living for ourselves, but we're living the way that God has called us to live. And if we do that, things can be so much better. But we need to ask ourselves some questions in order to get there. First of all, if we have these character defects in our lives, these things that we do and these addictions and all these things that we have in our lives, we have to ask ourselves, well, where do these things come from in my life? Where did they start in the first place? Because if we can identify where they start and where they come from, it helps us to more effectively deal with them. And the first thing that we have to look at and say, where do my character defects come from? Well, first of all, they come from my chromosomes. We all understand that there are genetics, right? And there are certain things that get passed along from our parents to us, and some of those things are physical attributes that you can see. You look and when you're younger, you're like, man, I hope I never look like my mom and dad, and then you start looking in the mirror and you're like, oh no, I get up here to preach and I'm like, oh, the Robert Cox, and you're like, no, I don't want this. But somehow it comes down, it hits you, right? It gets passed down. And whenever it comes to our character defects, there are some things, temperaments and things like that get passed down to us genetically. And, your mom and dad, they contributed somewhere around, for most of you, 23,000 chromosomes to you. And some of their contributions they gave you were not of the highest quality. And we need to understand that you've got some things from your parents that you look at and you're like, man, I wish this wasn't something my parents passed down to me, but I'm stuck with it. It's not going anywhere. So we've got to look and realize some of my character defects come from my chromosomes. Second of all, some of them come from my circumstances. They come from my circumstances, where I've been, the things I've been involved in, what's went on around me. And basically what I mean when I say my circumstances, I mean that your character defects come from there because circumstances represent the subconscious choices that you make based upon the pressure of the environment around you. And so you grow up in a certain type of household with certain types of people, and in the way that those people react, it teaches you you learn how to behave based on your circumstances and different pressures that are put upon you. And you watch the way that your family interacts, and you watch the way your parents make decisions, and the other people in your life who are influential. You watch the way that they teach you, and you start learning to do those things. And your circumstances and your environment play a role in some of your character defects. A lot of people, they look and they think that what happens in their household is normal, that it's like the way things are everywhere else, right? I was talking to this guy one time, and he was like, what? I don't get the big deal. Everybody in my household walked around in their underwear. And I'm like, well, that's not normal behavior for people just to be walking around the house in their underwear. And he's like, in his underwear, they're like, well, I don't see why not. And I'm like, dude, put on some clothes. Like, there are people here. Stop walking around in your underwear. To him, seemed totally normal. And maybe you look at the way that you've chosen to deal with different things in your life. And you're like, well, that's the way I've always seen people deal with it. I thought that was just the way. I thought this is how you responded to pressure. I thought this is how you responded to tough times. Because to you, it seems completely normal to respond that way. But other people are like, no, bud, that's a character defect that you learned from somebody. And you're like, really? Are you sure? And we're like, absolutely sure that is something you learned that is not normal behavior. And so we look and, for us to say, where do my character defects come from? It's very easy for us, especially in our society, to say, oh, well, it's my parents' fault. It's genetic. It's something I can't change. I was born this way, right? Top 40 songs. I was born this way. Basically saying, listen, there's nothing I can do about any of my character defects. This is just who I am because this is my genetics. Or it's easy for us to look and say, well, the reason I'm so screwed up is because my family was so screwed up, and my mom and dad did this to me, and there's nothing I can do because this is who they made me. And here I am, ta-da, and we think that's the end of it. And there are some truth to those things, right? We get some of our character defects from genetics. We get some of those from the environment that we grow up in, from the circumstances that are going on around us. But we also need to look and realize that some of my character defects, and in fact, probably most of your character defects, come from my choices. Before you go blaming your parents for 2/3 of the problems in your life, it's really important that maybe you go back and examine the choices that you've made and ask yourself what they have to do with where you are in your position in life right now. Because I think if you really start going back and looking, it's not genetics and it's not your environment that has forced you to be where you are. You've made decisions that have gotten you to the point in life where you're at. But again, in our society, it's so easy to want to blame everyone else, to blame your genetics, but to blame your circumstances, to blame everything other than us for why we are where we are. And as long as we do that, we'll never overcome our addictions. We'll never overcome our hurts from the past. We'll never overcome any of those things because we have made ourselves into people who are victims, and we can't do anything about it because it has nothing to do with me. Jay Adams, he's a famous Christian counselor, and in his book, Competent to Counsel, he starts out with a poem that kind of basically sums this up really well, and it says this: I went to my psychiatrist to be psychoanalyzed, to find out why I killed the cat and blackened my husband's eyes. He laid me on a downy couch to see what he could find, and here's what he dredged up from my subconscious mind. When I was 1, my mommy hid my dolly in a trunk, and so it follows naturally that I'm always drunk. When I was 2, I saw my father kiss the maid one day, and that's why I suffer from kleptomania. At 3, I had the feeling of ambivalence towards my brothers, and so naturally I poisoned all of my lovers. But I'm happy now. I've learned the lesson taught that every wrong I do is someone else's fault. And what we want to do is we want to look at our lives and we want to look at the things that we're addicted to and the bad choices we make and all the stuff that we get ourselves involved in, and we want to push it off on somebody else. And what we need to start doing is realizing if things are ever going to be any different, we have got to start accepting some personal responsibility. Because this culture that we live in is not going to try to force you to do that. It's a decision that you're going to have to make. Because the culture we live in is going to tell you, yeah, blame it on somebody else. And that's why we see this steady decline going on in our culture, because no one wants to take and admit fault for themselves. And it's a really sad thing to see take place, because whenever we blame everything on everybody else, you're a prisoner of where you're at. Because you can't go back and change your genetics. You can't go back and change your upbringing. So the way that the world paints this picture is you're just stuck where you are. There's nothing you can do about it. And God says, hold on a minute. That's not the way this was designed to be. I can help you have something different. I can help you be something different, but you're going to have to listen to what I say, and it's not going to be an easy road. I believe wholeheartedly that some of the people in our audience, you in your past have went back and you have fought hard to be something different than what you are. And you were like, and you looked and you said, man, I've really desperately tried to overcome this addiction. I've desperately tried to become somebody different. I don't want to treat people the way that I treat them, but it seems like I just can't do it. I'm stuck here. I can't become something different. And God says, no, it's going to be difficult, but you can. But we need to say, okay, well, then why is it so hard for me to change? Why is it so hard for me to overcome these character defects? Well, first of all, longevity, because you've had them for so long. You know, whenever you've been stuck in a circumstance for so long, you start to just buy into the fact that that's the way that it has to be, that things can't be any different. Well, I've always been this way. I was born this way. Since I was a kid, I've treated people that way. Since I was a kid, I've had an addictive personality, whatever it is. And we start looking, I can never be different because this is all I've ever known. So that just proves that nothing can ever be different. You know, and that's just not the way that God works. In Mark 9, verse 21 and 22, Jesus asks a question. He says, how long has he been like this? From childhood, they answered. If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus steps into a situation that seems so hopeless because since childhood, this has been messed up. And Jesus steps into that situation and says, things are about to be a lot different. And you need to understand, just because maybe you've dealt with this struggle for so long, maybe you've dealt with it your entire life, you think that things can't be any different. God says, no, listen to me. Just because you've dealt with something for a long time doesn't mean that I can't step in and change it and make it something different and something better. See, longevity makes us think that we just can't overcome it because it's always been there. Second of all, identity. You know, we start identifying ourselves with our character defects. And we start believing, again, that's just who I am. That's the way it is. You know, I'm sure all of us have those family members whenever you bring someone over to dinner and you know, like, you've got a family member that's going to be there and you tell your friends, you're like, just ignore my uncle. He's crazy. It's just the way he is. And we excuse away the way they act, even though we all know it's wrong. And we act like it's something that they can't be different. That's just their identity. That's just who he is. He just treats people like that. He's just rude at the dinner table. And we do that same thing with ourselves. We start to identify ourselves with our character defects. And we're like, oh, that's just the way I am. That's just the way it's always going to be. And we believe that. And God says, no, listen to me, that it isn't like that. You see, in the Bible, there's a story of Moses, and God is wanting Moses to come, and he wants Moses to help take his people back, and he wants to free them, and they're enslaved at the time. And he goes to Moses and says, Moses, you're going to lead my people out of Egypt. And Moses is like, that's not who I am. That's not what, I can't do this. I don't talk well. I don't speak well. And he has all these excuses of these character defects that he has that are going to keep him from being able to lead God's people. And God looks at Moses and he says, listen, you don't have to worry about this. I've got it under control. And in Exodus 3, verse 14, he says, God said to Moses, I am the eternal God. So tell them that the Lord, whose name is I am, has sent you. You see, the thing that we need to understand is God is the only I am being, and the rest of us are to become beings. God is who he is, and he says, listen, you may feel stuck where you are. You may think that's who you are, but you can become something different. And what he does with Moses is he snatches him up and he takes him out of there. And with his power, he starts showing Moses that he is going to be able to be used by God. And he takes the people out of Egypt. And God looks at us and he says, listen, you may feel like you're stuck there, but listen, I'm the I am being, and you can become something different than what you are. You don't have to identify with your character defects and stay there, no matter how long you've had them. The third reason that sometimes it's hard to overcome and change our character defects is productivity. You see, they have a positive side. You know, the character defects and the addictions that we're involved in, we do those things for a reason. We get something good out of them. Even if in the long term they're going to destroy our lives, in the moment, they make us feel better, right? There's something good. Or maybe it's a character defect and you manipulate people and you get what you want, so you feel good in the moment when you get what you want, but the thing you forget is you're destroying those relationships over the long haul. And so what we do is we sacrifice our future for what in the moment is positive, and it destroys everything we're wanting to do. Hebrews 11:24, it says, by faith Moses chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. You see, the things that the sin in our lives, our character defects, the addictions that we have, there are things for a short time that when we're involved in those things, it makes us feel better. Yeah, I feel bad, so I'm going to go get drunk or I'm going to go get high. And for the moment, it's productive, we think, because it just makes us forget everything that's going on and we're able to lay it to the side. But then later on, you look back and you're like, I'm still messed up. You know, for the moment, hooking up with some random person, it may seem like something good, and you get that momentary moment where you feel great, but then the next morning when you're doing the walk of shame, you're looking back and you're like, man, I'm a piece of trash. You know, or when you find out later you're pregnant, you don't even know the guy's name, or whatever it might be. In the moment, it makes you feel better, but then you're looking back and you're like, man, it was not worth it. But it's hard to overcome them because of that positive side. You may look and you say, man, I know I lose my temper and I scream and I yell and I throw things, but when I do it, my kids do what I say. So we justify it because they do what we say, even though we're damaging our relationship with our family. You know, and the thing is, it's hard to put to death a friend. We all have had friends in our lives who we know we need to cut out of our lives because they hurt us. And it's not a good relationship. And whenever it comes to our character defects and our addictions, they're bad friends. But because we're comfortable with them and because of the few good things we get from those things, it's very hard for us to distance ourselves or cut ourselves off from those things, even though they damage us. And we've got to look and realize that just because I've been something for so long and because I identify with it, even if it's the productive things that come out of it here and there, that doesn't mean that they can't be different and they shouldn't be different. The final thing that makes it really difficult to overcome that we're going to talk about today is we have an adversary, because Satan is fighting against you. You see, this is not just a normal thing whenever we have these character defects and these addictions. There's a war going on. And war is never easy. It's difficult. You have to fight to win a war. And you need to realize that there is a war going on that you can't see. And Satan, the reason it's hard to overcome and change these things is Satan doesn't want you to overcome them. Ephesians 6:12 says, for we are not fighting against human beings, but against the wicked spiritual forces in the heavenly world, the rulers, authorities, and cosmic powers of this dark age. See, the problem isn't people, it's evil. Satan is trying to destroy our lives. And he is going to push those addictions and those habits and those character defects as hard as he can, because he wants to control and destroy your life. And if we're going to be something different, we can't expect it to be a walk in the park. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a battle, because that's what's going on. You may not see it right in front of your eyes, but spiritually there's a battle going on for our souls, and Satan is not going to give up easily. We need to remember that there's a fight going on. And I think as you look at those things, with it being the longevity, I've been this way for so long, identity, this is who I am, with the things, the productivity that comes for the moment out of our sin, with the war that's going on, sometimes it's so easy just to want to give up, right? And be like, well, all this stuff, there's no way I can overcome this. I can't change it. I can't be something different. And we forget about all of the consequences that go along with staying where we are, and to continuing the habits and the addictions that we're involved in. And we forget about how it destroys our lives and how miserable we are, and how when you lay down at night in bed by yourself and you're laying there and you're sobbing because you know how hurt you are and how hopeless you really do feel. And you forget about the fact that it's affecting your kids or your parents or your friends and the people who are involved in your life, the people at work. It's affecting everyone around you. And sometimes I think we just minimize or we forget the fact that there are consequences for our character defects. There are consequences for our sin, and they have a ripple effect that can destroy everything that's going on. Right now, we're going to watch a video. It's a video by Simple Plan, and the song is called Untitled, but the video does a great job of showing us the effect that sin has and the ripple effect that takes place. So let's watch that, and then I'll be right back up. You know, as you watch that video, it's crazy because you see the decision that one guy is making, and you see the impact that it has on him, and you see the impact it has on his family and her and the girl who's in the accident, and the impact it has on their family, and this ripple effect from his character defects and his addiction to you see what it takes place and how it destroys so many people's lives. And when those cars hit and you see everything just everybody go flying, and it's trying to show you the impact that the decisions that we make have on everyone around us. And when we forget that, it's very easy not to have the will or the desire or the heart to change and be something different. Because what we want to do is a lot of times we want to escape the consequences rather than becoming something different. I was thinking about it as I watched that video. Have you guys heard those traffic law counselor commercials on the radio? Traffic law counselors. You know what I'm talking about? Call $45, doc. You know what I'm talking about? Well, there's a new one right now, and it's about DUIs. Have you heard it? And it's like, did you blow.com. Have you heard that song? And it's like the first question lawyer asks is, did you blow? The whole song is about people who are out drunk driving and how this law firm is saying the first question a lawyer is going to ask you is, did you blow? And helping you find ways to get out of dealing with the consequences of your poor decisions. And, you know, and the commercial is ridiculous. I'm sure you can get online and hear it. It's crazy because it's all about escaping the consequences rather than becoming something different so that it doesn't repeat itself. And it goes through like 5 different scenarios in this commercial of people why they're drunk driving. And like, yeah, you went to a wedding, got a little drunk, and then you got pulled over, did you blow.com. Like, and it's like, it's nothing about becoming something different or changing. It's all about, hey, how can I escape the consequences? And if our lives are going to be something different, then we have got to become people who realize it's not enough for me to acknowledge what's going on because it will repeat itself. If all I'm doing is saying, hey, I'm screwed up and this is just the way I am, well, then guess what is going to happen 3 months down the road? You're going to be in the same position again, miserable because nothing changes. So we've got to look and say, where do my defects come from? Why is it so hard for me to change? And then finally, we need to ask, well, how do I participate in God's change process? How can I be something different than what I am? Again, Romans 12:12 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. It says, listen, if you want your life to be different, if you want to be a new person, you're not going to do that by copying the customs and behaviors of this world. We talked about this earlier. You can go to all kinds of counselors. You can go to all kinds of people who will tell you, well, nothing's your fault. And here, take this and you'll feel better. And nothing changes. And the Bible says, listen, if you want your life to be different, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to stop copying the customs and behaviors and the advice of this world. And you're going to have to let God get involved in this process to transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think about things. Because it is not enough to do things the way that the world says. Because if you look at who wants to be like the world around us, sometimes look at the world around you and see how really screwed up things are in the world. People are miserable. They're depressed. Divorce rates are going up. We have more and more homes without parents in them. We have more and more people who are on drugs. We have more and more people who are addicted to things. We have more and more people in counseling. The world is screwed up, guys. So why, whenever it comes to becoming something different and having a different life, would we listen to the world when it's so messed up? God says, listen, if you want things to be different, then you've got to be involved in my process. You've got to do things my way. You've got to change them the way that I tell you to, and things can be different. So let's look at how do I get involved in God's change process. First of all, I focus on changing one defect at a time. Proverbs 17:24 says, an intelligent person aims at wise action, but a fool starts off in many directions. Now, when I say this, focus on one defect at a time, I don't want you to use this as an excuse to be like, okay, well, you know, I know that drinking makes me feel better, but so does beating my wife, so I'll focus on the drinking first, but I can still beat her up every once in a while to overcome. That's not what I'm saying. When I say focus on one thing at a time, I'm saying we need to get to the root of what's going on. And we need to look and say, what is it that causes these issues? And we need to focus on that rather than focusing on everything at one time and getting lost and overwhelmed in everything that's going on in our lives. Focus on the things that are causing these problems and say, okay, I need to really deal with these issues. Identify with them and overcome them so that your life can be something different. Because whenever you try to tackle everything all at once, it's very easy to be just weighed down by the burden and pressure that puts on us and say, man, there's no way, this is too much for me to deal with. And to get discouraged and give up. We've got to focus on changing one defect at a time. Second of all, we have to focus on victory one day at a time. You know, this is something that any 12-step program like Celebrate Recovery or AA, any of them that you go to, they're all going to talk about this. You know, you don't have to look very far to see that every movie that deals with recovery in any way, like if you see people in AA, you'll always see them talking to each other like just one day at a time. You know, let's take it this one day. You got to get through today. All the time you see that taking place. And it's actually a true statement. We've got to be people who focus on one day at a time. Matthew 6:11 says, give us this day our daily bread. He's not saying, hey, give me the next week's bread. He's like, no, listen, give me today. Give me today. Matthew 6:34 says, don't worry about tomorrow. It will take care of itself. You have enough to worry about today. He's saying, listen, you can't focus on everything that's going to happen in the future, because when you do that, you lose sight of today and you get yourself in a lot of trouble. Because when you're looking way far down the line, again, it's so easy to get off track. And it's so easy for us to be consumed by what's going to happen that we forget what's going on right now. And we, again, get overwhelmed and we start making bad decisions and getting caught up. Take it one day at a time, and you'll be able to help change the way that God wants you to. The third thing is focus on God's power, not willpower. You know, again, I know there are a lot of people out here, you've looked in the past and you can look and you say, man, I've tried. Yeah, the pump's messed up back there. Everybody's like, what is that? You know, in the past, you look back at decisions you've made or addictions that you have, and you're like, man, I've tried so hard to be something different, and you focused on doing it your way and on changing and on your power rather than focusing on God's power. We can't focus on power. We have to focus on God's power, not willpower. John 15:5 says, you cannot do anything without me. But in Philippians 4:13, it says, I can master anything with the help of Christ who gives me strength. And what that passage is trying to let you know is those two passages saying, listen, if you're trying to do this on your own, you're right. You are not going to become something different. You are not going to change because you can't do it on your own. Even groups like AA, they say, listen, you got to focus on a higher power is what they would say, right? And obviously here we're looking and saying God is the only higher power. And we look at that and we're saying, man, this is something that you've got to realize, that God is the one who's going to help you overcome these things. You are not going to do this on your own. If you could have done it on your own, don't you think things would have been different already? If you could change it and you could deal with all the junk and all the crap that goes on in your life, don't you think you would have already done so? Everybody here would look and say, man, I want to have a good life. Well, if you could do it, then do it. But I think we've proven to ourselves so many times, I can't. And we've got to look and say, okay, if I can't do this on my own, I've got to get in line with God and say, okay, God, can't do this. I need your help. I need you to step in. I need you to help me become something more and something different than what I am. The fourth thing is I have to focus on what I want, not what I don't. That seems pretty obvious, right? Okay, if I want something, I need to focus on that, not on the things I don't want. But it's not quite as obvious as it seems. I think a lot of times in our lives we look and what we really want is we want to have a blessed life, right? We want to be able to, when we grow old, look back on our life and say, man, I have had a good life. I've had a life that was good for me. It impacted the other people around me positively. And I have kids who have been taken care of, and they're people who are productive and they're doing good things. And you want to look back and you want to see that you've made a difference. That's what we really want. But what we tend to focus on is the moment, the moment, right? And we look at what we have right then. And rather than looking at the long term and saying, this is what I really desire, we're looking to fill what is right there. And we focus, and that's not what you really want. Do you really want to wake up the next morning with a hangover, or do you want to wake up 50 years from now knowing that your life has made a difference? What do you really want? We have to focus on those things. We have to focus on the good things in our lives, the things that God has put before us. Philippians 4:8 says, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure, lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. He's saying, listen, you've got to focus on different things than you focused on before. You got to focus on the things that God puts before you. You got to focus on truth. You got to focus on God's word. You got to focus on the good things. You cannot focus on all those negative things that you don't want to have anything to do with. Focus on the godly things, and God will be able to help make a difference. The fifth thing is focus on doing good, not feeling good. Again, we start to, whenever we're going through a difficult time, we want to numb that pain. We want to do whatever it takes to take away the hurt that we're dealing with in that moment. So rather than doing what is good that is going to affect us long term with benefit, we want to do whatever makes us feel good right then. Just give me whatever it is. There's so many times where we just want to jump in. Whatever it takes to feel good in that moment is what we're going to do. And we don't think about how it's going to hurt or impact anybody else around us. In Genesis 4, 6, and 7, the word says, "Then the Lord asked Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why do you look disappointed? If you do well, won't you be accepted?'" And he's saying, listen, Cain, if you want things to be different, don't do something stupid right now to get what you want. Do what's right, and in the long run, God is going to bless your life. And we've got to be people who look and say, I have to do what's good and do what's right, not what feels good and feels right. Our feelings, they screw us up all the time. Think about how many times you've done something because you knew it was going to feel good, but later on, you look back and you're like, why did I do that? That was so stupid. And in that momentary flash, and you look back and you're like, man, I'm miserable because of that. We have to focus on doing good and not feeling good. Galatians 5:16, Paul says, if you're guided by the Spirit, you'll be in no danger of yielding yourself to self-indulgence. You see, we all the time, we self-indulge in the things that are going to make us feel good. And he says, listen, what you've got to do rather than focusing on that is you have to be guided by the Spirit. You have to do what God says. You guys, the next thing we have to do, number 6, is focus on helpful people, not hindering people. There are a lot of people in our lives who we understand and we know they are not good for us. When my dad was younger, he was stealing. He was involved in all kinds of crazy stuff. He was not a good kid, and he was about to go to jail. And he realized, if my life is going to be different, I have to cut out all these people. I have to get away from this place that I'm in, and I am going to have to go somewhere else and be around people who know how to live a different kind of lifestyle, because all that I know and all that my friends know is how to get ourselves in trouble. All we know is how to screw up our lives. And so I've got to go somewhere else. So he moved away from his little hick town, and he moved out of there. He moved out of Belle Rive, and he moved to where he could be around people who were going to help benefit his life and help him change. And he didn't go home because he knew that if he went back there, he was going to get sucked into those same old relationships. And we get caught up in these codependent relationships with people who enable us and help us be something that we don't even want to be. And we've got to get rid of those hindering people and find helpful people. Proverbs 27:1 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. It says, listen, you can get people in your life who can sharpen you, but you know what? If you can find people who can sharpen you, you can also find people who will dull you. And you got to remove yourself from those situations and those people who are going to dull you, who are going to keep you from doing what's right, who are going to push you into things that are, or enable you to be involved in things that are going to damage your life. Psalms 141 verse 5 says, let a righteous man strike me. It is a kindness. Let him rebuke me. It is oil for my head. Let my head not refuse it. That he's saying, God, I want you to allow me to be in a relationship with people who are going to kick me in my butt when I need it and who are going to help teach me to do what's right. And I know at the time it's going to be painful, but I also know it's what I need. So help me to find people like that. That is not most of our attitudes when it comes to having people who are going to tell us what we need to hear. We tend to go search and seek out and find people who are going to tell us exactly what we want to hear so that we can keep on making the same stupid decisions that we've always made, end up in the same mess we've always been in. And we've got to get ourselves away from those types of people and find people who are going to say things that we don't like. The people who are going to be like, you're acting like an idiot right now, and you've got to stop this behavior because it's going to destroy you. And we need to have the attitudes and hearts that say, okay, God, let me consider this oil. Let me consider this something that's soothing me, that's going to help me become something different than what I already am. If we're going to be involved in God's change process, we have to focus on one defect at a time, one day at a time. We have to realize that we're not going to do it of our own power, and we got to stop doing the things that feel good and do the things that are right And we got to find people who are going to help us do those. And then we also have to focus on direction, not perfection. This is something I know we've talked a lot about with our campus ministry. It's so easy, to want to be perfect. And we think that if we're going to have a relationship with God, well, I have to be perfect. I've heard people say before, well, I can't be baptized until I stop sinning, until I'm perfect. And you're like, well, then you're never getting baptized because you're never going to get there. God never expected you to focus on perfection. He wanted you to focus on the direction that you're headed in. And, I think about like how many times people have gotten discouraged because they've messed up. And they're like, well, I messed up, so I might as well just turn around and go back to my old life. What kind of sense does that make? You've made so much progress, and God has brought you along this far, and he wants you to keep moving. Don't give up when you hit a bump in the road. Focus on the direction, not perfection. I think about it like being like an uphill slant you're wanting to go up. And there's going to be some valleys, and you're going to have some hiccups and some problems. But as long as you keep moving up, you're going to do this, but you're still moving in the right direction. And God says, listen, I didn't expect you to be perfect. I knew you weren't going to be. That's why I came and was perfect and died so that you didn't have to be. I knew that was going to happen. Philippians 1:6 says, God who began the good work in you will keep right on helping you grow in his grace until his task is finally finished with you. He's saying, listen, you're not going to do it perfectly, but God who started this good work in you, he's not going to just stop. He's going to give you the grace that you need to keep heading in the right direction until you are finally what he designed you to be and what he wanted you to be. So whenever you hit those hiccups in the road, don't give up, don't turn around, don't go back in the opposite direction. Make the choice to do the hard thing and keep heading in the right direction. You are not going to be perfect. Focus on direction, not perfection. And finally, focus on God's love for me, not my love for God. Because if you're focused on your love for God, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to mess up, but God's love is perfect. And all the time that we're screwed up and we're messed up and we're addicted and we have habits and we have hang-ups and character defects that are disgusting to us and everyone else around us, God is with us the whole time. Romans 5:7 says, Christ died for us while we were still sinners, and this demonstrates God's love for us. If you start focusing on your love for God, you'll start saying, man, I just don't love him the way I need to, so I'm just going to quit. But if you keep looking at his love, then his love will compel you. You should be grateful for what it has, and it will compel you to keep moving forward. It's like that person you have in your life. Maybe you look and you have someone who just loves you so much they refuse to give up on you. And even when you want to give up on yourself, you just can't do it because you know how much they love you and how they long for you to have something better. And so you're like, I'm going to take another step forward. And God says, that's the way that I love you. I am that person. While you're messed up, while you were still a sinner, I came and died for you. And 2 Corinthians 5:14 says the love of Christ should control us or compel us to keep moving forward. Because he loves us regardless of where we're at. And regardless of when we screw up, he is there with us to help us move forward. And we need to be grateful enough for that love to say, even though it's difficult, even though I feel like I'm stuck here, even though I identify with this, even though this is what I feel like, maybe I've been this way since I was born, whatever it might be, God says, listen, stay with me and keep headed in the right direction because I am not going anywhere. And things can be so much different and so much better. And I've seen that happen here at the crossings time and time and time again. I've seen people come into the crossings, and a lot of times you can see people come in, and you can just tell they're beat up. And they're beat up from their chromosomes, from their circumstances, and they're beat up from the awful choices that they've made. And they look like they're ready to give up. But then you see God start to get involved, and you see them get involved with godly people, and you see them starting to make some changes, and you see God work on their lives, and you see them start to develop families. I look at TC, the guy that was up here. When we met TC, he was a mess. He was a mess. I can't even tell you. The reason we met TC, and I don't think he said this, did he? The reason we met TC is we were studying the Bible with this teenager and this high school kid, and we were like, hey, if your life is going to be different, what are some things you need to stay away from or cut out? And he goes, oh, definitely my brother TC. And we're like, he's like, he gets me in trouble all the time. He's an alcoholic. He buys us beer. He does all this stuff for him. And I was like, well, before you give up on TC, why don't we see if we can help TC have a relationship with God too? And we met TC, and that's how we met TC. And he was headed for the same destructive life that his dad had walked down, and for the same screwed up family that he had. And Mallory back here is shaking her head because that's TC's sister back here in the green. Mallory, the first time I met Mallory, TC was at one of our cross chats, and Mallory calls TC while we're at cross chat because she wants TC to go buy her alcohol because she's underage. TC is like, I'm not doing that anymore, Mal. I'm not doing it. I'm like, give me the phone, give me the phone, give me the phone. I wanted it so bad. So he gives me the phone. I'm like, hey, why don't you come to cross chat? She's like, what the boop? And, starts cussing me out. I'm like, Mallory, things can be a lot better. I know you're miserable, and then here you see Mallory, and she's working with our junior high ministry. And I can sit here and go through the audience and talk about person after person after person after person that I've seen when they came. It was a wreck. There were so many character defects and so many addictions and so many hurts and habits and so many hang-ups. And what they've done is they've come and they've said, listen, I've got to make some changes. I've got to submit everything that God wants me to change if my life is going to be any different. And we've seen lives touched and impacted here at the crossings and all over the place. Matt Hernando back here in our sound booth was telling me earlier that Zung's sister, when we met Zung didn't believe in God. She didn't believe things could be different. She didn't think her life would be near what it is now, and she started studying the Bible, became a Christian. Now, Zung's sister, Lynn, is on watching in Germany right now. And it's an exciting thing to know that God is working here at the crossings, and he's working in ways that we don't even understand and in places that we don't understand. And he is longing for people to have something better, to have something different. But we've got to buy into his process, not our process. And when he says something has to change, we have to listen. We have to humbly say, God, show me my character defects. Show me the things in my life that have got to go, and give me the strength to help overcome those things, and he will. And the reason I can say that confidently is I've seen it happen time and time and time again. So never feel like you're so screwed up that God can't step in and bring about something different in your life, because I'm telling you, I've seen him do it. And that's what he's longing for you as well.